introduction, and thank you very much for having me here. I want to thank particularly PK for having me here for 3 weeks for a micro sabbatical. I had 2 very good weeks already, and now the last week has unfortunately already started. So it's a pleasure to say some words about agroforestry systems in Europe. So this is what has to happen. So I will start with a brief introduction to the existing traditional agroforestry systems in Europe, and then switch to the novel new agroforestry developments that we try to pursue, and also say something about the uptake and the policy context. Most of my results come from the AgForward project. This was a collaborative European research project where the European Union issued a call for research, and then we grouped together scientists from almost all European countries were involved to work on agroforestry for Europe. PK was on the scientific advisory board, so he knows this project very well. The first thing to do was to look at the existing agroforestry situation in Switzerland, and there was, for the first time, an actual estimation on how much agroforestry there is. We have about 15 million hectares at present. This corresponds to 3.6% of the European territory, or almost 9% of the farmland is actually some type of agroforestry. The most prominent and widespread system are livestock agroforestry systems, silvopastoral systems. You find them everywhere in Europe, prominently in the south, of course, but also in the center and even all the way up to far to the north, where reindeer herding is also considered as an agroforestry activity. The picture here is from a dehesa or a montado in the Mediterranean peninsula, where you have these oaks, cork oaks, or stone oaks, and animals grazing below. Then high value tree agroforestry, it was called here. This is an example of a traditional fruit orchard with those high stem fruit trees, standard fruit trees on grassland, which is either mown or grazed or both. And this also occurs in the south, but also in the center of Europe. And then the smallest type of agroforestry is arable agroforestry. Here we see an olive orchard, which is intercropped, and this is still practiced, or is practiced in Greece, in Italy, and in Spain, so more in the Mediterranean parts of Europe. And because we still have a lot of agroforestry, we could use those traditional systems to examine the ecosystem services they provide, not only at the plot scale, but also really at the landscape scale. So we looked at the productivity, of course, of fruits, of trees, of wood, of the intercrops of the animals, and then also at things like soil fertility, erosion control, carbon storage, and some biodiversity indicators. We did this across 12 case study regions throughout Europe, so from the south to the north, from the west to the east. And the way we did that was by comparing agroforestry landscapes, such as this montado system in Portugal, to open pasture lands, where there are no trees or only very few trees. This is another example of traditional agroforestry orchards in Switzerland compared to arable grassland open agricultural landscapes, we sampled both types of landscapes with 1 square kilometers. So we had 4 squares in each type of landscape in each case study region. And there we mapped all the habitats, including all the trees, and then applied standard models to evaluate the ecosystem services. So again, the production, then groundwater recharge, nitrate leaching, erosion, carbon storage, and some biodiversity indicators. And the results of this whole exercise, just on half a slide, are that overall we found in the open agricultural landscapes where there is no agroforestry, we found higher groundwater recharge and higher annual biomass production, which are the agricultural products which are removed from the landscapes, which are harvested, such as potatoes or cereals or the fruits. So that yield which you harvest every year was higher in the non-agroforestry landscapes. In the agroforestry landscapes, on the other hand, we had higher carbon storage, reduced nitrate leaching and erosion, and higher pollination services and habitat diversity. Higher carbon storage because there the trees are not harvested every year, and we also have more carbon in the soil. Then my colleague Sonia Kai tried to estimate the monetary value of all those ecosystem services. And you can do this for the things that are harvested, the agricultural products. There is a market for this, it can be sold, so you can have some idea on how much money you can earn with this. And then there is literature which also gives values to groundwater. There is a market for carbon, so we can use those values. When we pollute the water, there are costs attached, which come attached because the water has to be cleaned, and people have used this to calculate values for keeping water clean. The same has been done for soil loss, erosion costs. And for pollination, you can calculate a value if the yield is reduced because pollination is not optimal. So we came up with values for all of those ecosystem services and then calculated the profitability of agroforestry as compared to agriculture again. And here we can see just for the agricultural and the wood products, the financial benefit of agroforestry as compared to the benefit from those open agricultural landscapes. And it's slightly higher or tends to be higher for the non-agricultural landscapes because we harvest more, and so there is a higher benefit. And then if we add those values, financial values for all those other ecosystem services, the situation changes, and we would have a higher profitability of agroforestry as compared to the non-agroforestry landscapes, if those other ecosystem services would result in some benefit for the farm, which they don't. But there is, in Europe, for example, or in Switzerland, we have subsidies for environmentally friendly practices, which somehow compensate for the loss, if you like, or for the fact that you cannot sell those ecosystem services as a farm. Now, if we have higher profitability for those traditional agroforestry systems, it should be even higher for novel agroforestry systems, which we try to develop in order to make them better adapted to modern machinery. They should be workable by modern farms with modern farm technology. Now, there's like two schools of thinking or groups of people. Some people think that agroforestry is like a secret weapon. You can resolve any problem anywhere, everybody can do it. It's like a miracle, so it's a wonderful solution. And then there is a second group of people who are maybe a bit more cautious and think that not everybody should do it, and we should think more carefully where to do it and how to do it. And as I always also tend to be a part of the second group, we try to find out where in Europe it would really make sense to have agroforestry. So we try to identify the locations across the continent where we have a maximum of environmental problems or of ecosystem service deficits. So the locations where we have soil erosion, where we have low soil organic carbon, nitrogen pollution. Also the places where we expect high impacts of climate change, so high increase in temperature, for example, where trees might be beneficial. And regions with biodiversity deficits, low soil biodiversity, potentially insufficient pest control and pollination. And there are, for all those deficits or ecosystem services, there are European maps. So we just overlaid them and did a very simple spatial analysis. And on this map, you can see in blue the cropland and in green the grassland systems, where several of those deficits occur at the same spot. So where they are stacked, 4 or 5 deficits at the same location. And there, agroforestry could be helpful because it provides those ecosystem services which can help to reduce those deficits. So altogether, we looked for the worst, say 10%, and the areas altogether here make up 8.9% of the European farmland. Then the next question is which type of agroforestry makes sense where? So we took advantage of this big group of this European consortium and asked the colleagues in the different countries what they would recommend to their farmers in their country, in their region. And we came up with a list of 64 candidate systems. For the Atlantic region, for example, the colleagues recommended 7 silvopastoral systems with fruit and fodder trees, or then 9 silvo-arable systems with short rotation coppicing, alley cropping, timber trees, or cereal dominated crop rotations generally. And what we did then was to implement those agroforestry systems in those locations. And now what we were curious, of course, on how much they could contribute to reduce those ecosystem service deficits. Now it's not possible to do this for biodiversity or for soil organic matter because the data is not there, the knowledge is not sufficient. But for carbon storage, it can be done. So we did it for carbon storage. European Union and Switzerland together every year emit 4,500 million tons of CO2 equivalents. And of these, about 12% are allocated, or let's say are caused by the agricultural sector. And if on those 9% of the farmland we would implement agroforestry, we could compensate up to 43% of those agriculturally related climate gas emissions. Now the 43% are the maximum value. There is a huge variability because of the huge variability of agroforestry systems that you can think of. And simply the higher the tree density is, the higher the carbon sequestration will be. Then my third topic is the uptake. So will this actually be happening, or what can we do to have more agroforestry in Europe? From my experience in Switzerland and also from what I hear from the European colleagues, it's very much a farmer-driven activity actually. So it's innovative farmers who have read about it, heard about it, may have seen a program on television, and they try to, for various reasons, to implement agroforestry on their farms. It's often they try to somehow intensify their activities. Maybe they have small farms, so they try to be able to harvest more from their farms. Or they have problems of soil erosion. This is what many of them say. They want to protect their soils better. Klein and colleagues did a survey on the acceptance by farmers of different ecological intensification techniques. So they showed them a whole list and asked them if they liked or like them, could think of implementing them or not. And the good news is that agro or tree-related techniques such as hedges, infill trees, or woodland edge management, they get up to 50% likes from those European farmers. So more than things as beetle banks or white flower strips are set aside. But it's only 50%, so not everybody wants to do. And I also think not everybody has to do. In another survey, we asked Swiss farmers what their thinking about agroforestry is. The scale is from between 1 and 6. 6 would be the maximum that they could give. It's the same scale as at school, so you give a 6 to a very good grade. 6 is the best grade you can get. 4 is just okay, and everything below is insufficient. So all farmers, those who have agroforestry and those who don't, are rather skeptical about productivity, the confidence in themselves to actually manage agroforestry, and also they're skeptical about the profitability of tree products. They're more optimistic, at least the agroforestry farmers, about the contribution of agroforestry to cultural landscapes, to biodiversity, to ecosystem services in general. And then there is the issue of the effect on the reputation. It's okay for the agroforestry farmers, for them it's okay, but for the non-adopters, they seem to be worried that their neighbors or fellow farmers would think they do a strange thing if they start to plant trees all of a sudden. Now that we got finally rid of all trees that are in the way of our tractors, start to plant trees nowadays. Why does he do that? So this is one of the reasons why they would want to adopt agroforestry. Now, as researchers, we cannot do much about that reputational risk. They have to know themselves if they want to take it. But we can try to improve the productivity and give advice on how to manage those agroforestry systems. So in the Forward project, we produced 50 or more leaflets on innovation and best practices in agroforestry for individual systems. And these leaflets are now available also on the website of the European Agroforestry Federation, which tries to promote agroforestry and which also organizes a biannual agroforestry conference. So I can just invite you to the conference in Italy, in Sardinia, this year in May. It's a beautiful place. So, on the policy side, we also see some progress. I think that European governments see that agriculture is under pressure also from the public because of environmental issues it creates. And they look for alternatives, and agroforestry is something which is ready and which they think they can take. So in the Farm Bill in Switzerland, which is going to Parliament now and should be implemented in 2022, they propose an agroforestry measure. Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, so we have our own agricultural policy. And until now, agroforestry was kind of supported by a program which supports farmland biodiversity. And hedgerows are famous for being biodiversity rich. And those traditional fruit orchards with their flowering trees are also famous for being biodiversity rich. So the farmers who do agroforestry in Switzerland, they get subsidies through those programs. And it works quite well, actually. I'm quite happy. Personally, I don't think we have to change much. Now they will want to have this agroforestry measure. And then we will have to deal with the same issues as the common agricultural policy has to deal with, meaning we have to come up with a definition of agroforestry, which is difficult, as PK knows very well. We also have to overcome the arguments that trees are not an element of agricultural production. So currently in some European countries, when you have a line on trees, the area is subtracted from the total agricultural area, and the area payment which you get is then also lower. So this is a strong disincentive for planting trees on farms. And such a measure has to be simple, operational, legally binding, so the administration has to be able to control that and argue with the farmers if what they do complies with their rules or not. And the Common Agricultural Policy, Brussels, they have been struggling this for many years now. There are agroforestry measures which Brussels proposes, but not all countries take them up because of those problems related to making it simply and easily operational. So we will see how we can handle this in Switzerland. As a kind of an outlook, it's a pleasure for me to, or we just learned that we will have a new European research project. It's called Agroforestry and Mixed Farming Systems. It will start this year and run for 4 years. Again, it's a big group of European universities and research institutes which will work together on this. And we will work on those gradients between livestock farming, arable farming, which have also separated, also in many regions in Europe, and trees, to promote mixed farming systems and agroforestry systems, mainly for those ecological services, ecosystem services that we can expect from them. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.